Thank you for listening to this Podcast One production, available on Apple Podcasts and Podcast One.
Your life, your country. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Podcast.
As you know, one of the primary purposes of the special counsel's investigation was to determine whether President Trump's campaign or any individual associated with it conspired or coordinated with the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 election. Volume 1 of the special counsel's report describes the results of that investigation. As you will see, the special counsel's report states that his, quote, investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. I am sure that all Americans share my concern about the efforts of the Russian government to interfere in our presidential election. As the special counsel report makes clear, the Russian government sought to interfere in our election process. But thanks to the special counsel's thorough investigation, we now know that the Russian operatives who perpetrated these schemes did not have the cooperation of President Trump or the Trump campaign, or the knowing assistance of any other American for that matter. That is something that all Americans can and should be grateful to have confirmed.
We're joined now by one of the president's top lawyers, Jay Sekulow, who will comment on this just released Mueller report. The press is in a complete and utter meltdown. Jay, thank you so much. I know you only have a few minutes today on the Laura Ingraham podcast. Jay, your initial reaction?
Well, obviously, we're pleased. Number one, as we've said from the outset, there was no collusion, no obstruction. Page 2 of the report says the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. So the whole basis upon which things started was dismissed on page 2.
When
did
they
400 pages of other stuff?
Right. So when did they know that there was no collusion, and why did the investigation go on and on?
It's hard to give a date, but when you read the report, it looks like they came to that conclusion pretty early.
Okay, so the question now goes...
That's really tragic.
That is tragic, because then all these other people got swept up in this, and lives got destroyed.
People that have been hauled in, and when you read the report and you read about all the discussions about the June 9th Trump Tower meeting, they make the conclusion that there was, nothing illegal about the meeting. They actually came to a legal conclusion on that one. That there was nothing that could have been an illegal act at that meeting because there was nothing of value, which is the legal standard. So it just tells you that they were going on. And I think what happened here was they viewed the obstruction as the president's, and we would view it as the president's First Amendment rights to defend himself.
Well, the media, of course, immediately jumped to the fact that the Mueller team did not come to a legal conclusion for prosecution on the question of obstruction. This is a drumbeat in the American media today, basically saying, look, there are 10 episodes that they believe could have, I guess, come close to obstruction in the report, and that Barr went ahead and made a conclusion on that. But they're hitting that relentlessly. That's the next thing they're chewing on.
Well, but it's interesting though. They did come to a conclusion because if they thought they had an obstruction case, they would have brought it or at least made the case. Instead, they did not, and we know if they would have, they could have, but they could not do it. And what you have is basically, to me, the way it reads is a reluctant 200-page declination letter.
Well, I think, again, we're seeing the American media revealed for who they are, and even people on CNN saying Bill Barr and MSNBC, and I think even one of my colleagues on Fox, Chris Wallace, intimating that Bill Barr is acting as the president's personal attorney here, meaning he would be taking your job, Jay. Right. Your reaction to the attacks on one of the brightest legal minds in America?
Well, you just said it. He's, Bill's reputation for over 4 decades in this city of ours is impeccable, cannot be impeached, and that's how desperate they are on this. And I think at the end of the day, the conclusion is, as we've said from the outset, there was no obstruction, there was no conclusion. And they said in the report, we're not saying that the president committed a crime. They're not exonerating him either. But as you know, prosecutors' jobs are not to exonerate. They either bring or decline. This is a decline.
I know you got to go, Jay, but just one more question. The theories, the legal theories on obstruction that they disagreed on, your thoughts on that? That Barr and Rosenstein.
I would call bizarre and novel theories of obstruction by tweak. And when you read the report, but Bill Barr interestingly said, even though they disagree with the theory, he viewed it through that lens and still came to the conclusion there was no obstructive acts. So I think that's very important.
Jay Sekulow, thank you so much for stopping in the Laura Ingraham podcast. We really appreciate it. Jay will be on with Hannity tonight. Rudy Giuliani will be on with us tonight on the Ingraham Angle. And we have so many more people. Saul Weisenberg, John Yoo. We're going to have the best legal analysis on Fox. You've got to tune in tonight if you want actual analysis and not ranting by Never Trump members of the resistance. Raymond Arroyo is with us here on the podcast. Raymond, you and I sat and watched these Never Trump resistance radicals masquerading as journalists on television. Most of them not lawyers, but even the few lawyers who were on television were grossly misstating the facts and grossly misstating Barr's responsibility. And I don't think the media will ever recover. I really don't. I don't think I've said this before. No. They've reached a new low, and I don't think there's any recovery.
Well, as a journalist who doesn't want to play the role of a lawyer, I'll just say this. I think you're 100% right. When you see a 50% cratering in ratings at MSNBC and CNN over the last month, something is clearly going on. And what's going on is the release of this information that was built up, hyped, sold to the American people as being something very different from what it turns out to have been. You heard from Jeffrey Toobin today on CNN. He said this was a political speech, Barr's summary, and endorsing the president's actions.
This was a political speech endorsing the president's behavior beyond the legalities of the situation, and that's just not.
Is that not the norm, though, among attorneys?
It's not the norm.
Saturday Night Massacre, the attorney generals refused to carry out the president's order, and they quit, as did the deputy, because they thought the president was giving them an order they should not follow.
Well, have we established that the president has given Barr an order? Was there any order given by the president?
They literally are just lying on TV. They are one after the other, embarrassing themselves and lying on national TV.
The rhetoric here was extraordinary. It sounded like a spokesman, not an attorney general. And the word collusion, a lawyer doesn't use that term because there is no crime of collusion. Only Trump uses that term. And so you have the attorney general parroting that.
Oh, my goodness. Well, that's Neil Katyal, who, again, has the pedigree of a lawyer and someone who knows better, but they're so subsumed and so identified with their hatred of Donald Trump that they've lost all legal objectivity. It's gone. That's truly terrifying. This on Holy Thursday, the Last Supper. And a lot of people making biblical references today and analogies, and some of them inappropriate, and I'm not even going to go there, but I've thought a lot about the suffering of people connected to the president and people who've supported the president's policies, who have been called every name in the book, who have been trashed, their reputations trashed, their livelihoods attacked. They've lost hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in legal fees. I think of them, what they went through. This entire investigation, as the president said with the Wounded Warriors this morning, this entire investigation, how it started, the underpinnings of it, the individuals like Christopher Steele working with Democrat operatives, working with the Clinton folks, working with Bruce Orr and Fusion GPS, all of this has to be investigated.
I'm having a good day, too. It was called No Collusion, No Obstruction. There never was, by the way, and there never will be. And we do have to get to the bottom of these things, I will say. And this should never happen. I say this in front of my friends, Wounded Warriors, and I just call them warriors because we just shook hands and they look great. They look so good, so beautiful. But I say it in front of my friends, this should never happen to another president again. This hoax, this should never happen to another president again. Thank you.
They went into great detail about, Bill Barr spoke of the president's state of mind and emotion, that the president thought it was unfair what happened to him. The president went on and on about how it was unfair. Well, yeah.
In assessing the president's actions discussed in the report, it is important to bear in mind the context. President Trump faced an unprecedented situation. As he entered into office and sought to perform his responsibilities as president, federal agents and prosecutors were scrutinizing his conduct before and after taking office and the conduct of some of his associates. At the same time, there was relentless speculation in the news media about the president's personal culpability. Yet, as he said from the beginning, there was in fact no collusion. And as the special counsel's report acknowledges, there is substantial evidence to show that the president was frustrated and angered by his sincere belief that the investigation was undermining his presidency, propelled by his political opponents, and fueled by illegal leaks. Nonetheless, the White House fully cooperated with the special counsel's investigation, providing unfettered access to campaign and White House documents, directing senior aides to testify freely, and asserting no privilege claims. And at the same time, the president took no act that in fact deprived the special counsel of the documents and witnesses necessary to complete his investigation. Apart from whether the acts were obstructive, this evidence of non-corrupt motives weighs heavily against any allegation that the president had a corrupt intent to obstruct the investigation.
Yeah, you have to go to the state of mind of the individual. The president was rightly upset that he was being investigated for being a traitor. So if you're the president, right, and you're the chief executive of this government, and you just got into town, like you just rolled into town a few months earlier, like, wait, whoa. You're telling me that they're going to, they opened a special counsel investigation that is, whose team is populated by a bunch of pro-Hillary partisans? And I'm going to be dragged through the mud on the basis of a Democrat dossier that is false? How can that possibly be right? Can you imagine if you were he and you were going through this? So the reason Barr mentions this is because Mueller looked at it, because it goes to the question of intent. Now, they didn't get an interview with the president, and thank God we have good lawyers who are representing Trump, because any lawyer worth his or her salt would never let a client go into an interview when the interview team is populated by pro-Hillary loyalists.
Okay, this is breaking. In the report, Mueller considered Trump's written answers inadequate, but he knew subpoena would impose substantial delay.
Didn't have the guts to try to fight the legal battle. The Mueller team did not have the guts to play the legal battle here. The battle would be, can you subpoena a president of the United States to testify? The answer is probably not. They didn't want to do it. They could have. If they really thought Trump was a criminal obstructing justice, they should have taken it all the way to the Supreme Court. They didn't.
They were dissatisfied with his answers. 30 times Trump writes, I don't recall. I don't remember. I don't have an independent recollection of that information.
They had no problem with this when it was Eric Holder.
Right.
They have no problem with this when it was Lois Lerner.
But they wrote that to pursue a subpoena would cause a substantial delay, and they also decided that they, quote, had sufficient evidence to understand relevant facts and to make certain assessments without the president's testimony. So they believed that they had all the surrounding data to substantiate what they needed to know without the president's testimony. That's the upshot. So the Washington Post is making a big deal about this, that it was inadequate. But then the special counsel goes on to say, we had the relevant facts to make certain assessments without the president's testimony.
Right. So, again, if they thought, and I'm going to make this point on the Ingraham angle tonight. You have to tune in. We have a phenomenal show. The best legal analysis on television, unlike what you've seen on TV for the last X number of hours. they did not believe that it was worth fighting for the president's testimony. That if they did, they would have gone to court to fight to get him to testify. They did not have the stomach for it. Couldn't do it. If they thought, this is pretty indicative of obstruction of justice. We got to nail this down, button this up. It's worth fighting for. They didn't think it was worth fighting for. They already had his written answers. They knew in a face-to-face, even if they got him face-to-face, he wasn't going to say anything different. So so they decided against it. And apparently there were long periods of time in between the communications between the special counsel's office and Trump's lawyers. Long periods of time where they didn't communicate at all about written answers, which also indicates that they just weren't all that serious about it. So the big question is, if they knew no collusion early on, if they knew there was no evidence early on of no collusion, why'd they keep going with this obstruction? Why did they keep going on obstruction if they knew early on there was no collusion? That's the big question, because they wanted to put some trophies on the wall. This is my theory. They wanted trophies on the wall, so you got the Russian indictments. They're never going to show up. You got Papadopoulos, low-level figure. You got Manafort on old stuff, had nothing to do with Trump. And then you throw that old guy in solitary confinement, make him look like the devil. Then you had poor old Carter Page out hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then you had Roger Stone, treated like he's a member of the Sinaloa crime cartel down in Mexico with the agent showing up at his door.
So that's the bottom line. After nearly 2 years of investigation, thousands of subpoenas, hundreds of warrants, and witness interviews, the special counsel confirmed that the Russian government sponsored efforts to illegally interfere with the 2016 presidential election, but did not find that the Trump campaign or other Americans colluded in those efforts.
Oh, no, wait a second. Just wait up. Wait a second. Trump was still too cozy with the Russians. And we heard John King on TV say, I think it was John King or Tubin, one of those buffoons. I'm legal buffoons, not buffoons as people. But on the law, they're just both wrong. Saying after that, well, but they lied about meetings. Well, Jared Kushner lied about never seeing a Russian or meeting a Russian. Because it was in passing. This is no serious interaction with the Russians. Like you say hi to an ambassador. It's like, this is minor stuff. Or Trump Tower. This is not a Russian. This was a setup from the Fusion GPS people, Christopher Steele people, that whole Russian Veselnitskaya meeting. That was like a DNC Russian. It's ridiculous. Whole thing this whole thing was one big setup from the beginning. One big setup. And the fact that this was allowed to happen is the real crime for any media figure worth his or her salt. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham podcast. Byron York, chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, is reading the report, his initial assessment of both what's in it and the media's hyperbolic meltdown today. I've never seen anything like it on television. Byron, 400-plus pages. What is your bottom line today?
Well, I think the bottom line is what it always has been, which is collusion. Was there a conspiracy between Russia and the Trump campaign to influence or fix the 2016 election? And the answer is no. That was the big thing all along. And the answer is no. And everything else stems from that. Did the president obstruct an investigation into this thing that did not happen? All the other things are secondary to collusion. So now we have the answer. It's in the report. Didn't happen.
Well, Byron, the question that Jay Sekulow just raised with us, and I think it's critical. It seems to from the way the report is written and from his interactions with the team, the Mueller team, that they knew fairly early that there was no collusion. Yet this thing continued on and on and on and on to try to put some novel theories in place about obstruction. And it was this novel approach to the 10 episodes that I think the 10 episodes were taken out of a CNN.com piece some months back. But I mean, they were trying to kind of turn this into some theory that would maybe could amount to obstructive action.
Right.
But if they knew fairly early that there was no evidence of collusion, they should have shut this investigation down, and they didn't.
Yeah, I did a couple of podcast interviews with John Dowd, who is the president's lawyer from June of 2017. That's just right after Mueller is appointed till March of 2018. And he is pretty clear by his interactions with the Mueller team, not only with Mueller himself, but a man named James Quarles, who was Mueller's one of his top deputies. He's pretty sure that Mueller had established no collusion by Christmas of 2017. And it's interesting, if you think back, there were stories floating out there around December of 2017 that Mueller might finish up, that the White House at least thought that he might finish up. And I think the White House thought that because they knew correctly that he had not been able to establish collusion, and then they thought incorrectly that that would be the end of that. What followed was this long investigation into an allegation of obstruction, the legal theorizing you're talking about, and the wrangling over whether the president would do an interview with Mueller. And that's what extended this basically from Christmas of 2017 until now in April of 2019.
Okay, so again, the American media, and Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept tweeted something out some hours ago that said he was incredulous in watching the reaction on television. So Barr comes out and he makes his statement. And we'll play one exchange with a young woman who I don't believe is a lawyer, who was asking about, isn't this unprecedented for you to do this? Let's listen.
Mr. Attorney General, let's talk with Democrats who have questioned some of the process here. A Republican-appointed judge on Tuesday said you have, quote, created an environment that has caused a significant part of the American public to be concerned about these redactions. You cleared the president on obstruction. The president is fundraising off of your comments about spying. And here you have remarks that are quite generous to the president, including acknowledging his feelings and his emotions. So what do you say to people on both sides of the aisle who are concerned that you are trying to protect the president?
Well, actually, the statements about his sincere beliefs are recognized in the report, that there was substantial evidence for that. So I'm not sure what your basis is for saying that I'm being generous to the president.
You face an unprecedented situation. It just seems like there's a lot of effort to go out of your way to acknowledge how this.
Well, is there another precedent for it?
No, but it's unusual.
Okay, so unprecedented is an accurate description, isn't it?
Yes. But
okay.
What do you say to people who are concerned?
I mean, Byron, this is a problem when you have these cub reporters they think this is their moment in the spotlight. They're not lawyers. They're not trained legal thinkers. And I'm sorry, but they're just not all that bright. But they're reading top lines on other media outlets. They're repeating them, and then they're just put down like a sad little puppy off a couch. When something like this happens, it's just embarrassing. Glenn Greenwald said he's never seen anything like it.
Well, it was also a way for Democrats to get their questions to Barr. I mean, basically, they come out and say something based on nothing, and then the press repeats it to Barr and asks his reaction. What was really astonishing about the whole news conference is they were an hour or an hour and a half away from actually having the report in their hands, and yet they could not keep themselves from speculating in the most amazing ways. MSNBC said that the news conference was a, quote, real black mark on Barr's career. Now, were they saying that he inaccurately or dishonestly mischaracterized the Mueller report? No, they were just saying that this was a real black mark on his career. So, and I tend to think Glenn Greenwald is right about this. It was just kind of an astonishing blow-up, but, they've been doing that a lot these days.
Now, and CNN, MSNBC, Raymond pointed out that their audience, in some cases, some days, is 50% of what it was a year ago. They're losing viewership, they're clearly losing influence, and they've lost their credibility.
Well, this has been a huge deal for them, and, CNN in particular gave Mueller the sort of Malaysian plane treatment. The difference being, of course, that the Malaysian plane was a really huge story. Couldn't be sustained for 6 months, but it was a huge story by anybody's measure to begin with. So a lot of their ratings depend on this. And they have isolated, certainly MSNBC has isolated that number of people out there who want to watch Resistance TV every night.
All right, Byron York here on the Laura Ingraham podcast. I think he's right about that. The media have lost credibility. They've lost relevance. They've lost viewership, readership, and yet they keep doing the same thing. It's like the definition of insanity. Again, just so you are updated, the full Mueller report is out. There are very few redactions in this, as far as I can see. And there is no indication that the Trump team invoked ever, even thought of invoking executive privilege. According to Bill Barr, the Attorney General, they could have invoked executive privilege on all these notes that were taken by Jeff Sessions' Chief of Staff, Jody, what's her name? Jody Hunt. How annoying of her. Why is she taking notes of what the president is saying? I don't even like that. They shouldn't even be taking notes of what he's saying inside the Oval Office. After the special counsel was appointed, the president basically said, this is, expletive, this is the end of my presidency.
This is the end of my presidency. I'm effed.
I'm blanked.
This is terrible.
This is terrible.
Everyone tells me if you get one of these independent counsels, it ruins your presidency. It takes years and years, and I won't be able to do anything. This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me.
Yeah, can you imagine what he felt? I would have said the same exact thing.
You're also dealing, and I feel...
wouldn't you love to see these journalists in real time, if they're accused of something, if they're accused of sexual impropriety, if they're accused in real time, unfairly accused, what they would say? Do you think Mika Brzezinski wouldn't say something? She's like tweeting, oh, it's not over, Donald. Do you think she wouldn't say something just like that if she believed she was being unfairly targeted? She would. Something, and at least expressing frustration. So
we're also dealing with political novices for the most part here. Donald Trump Jr., Donald Trump himself, his family, the people around him, even Corey Lewandowski. These people were not old political hands. And the old political hands that they brought in later, like Manafort, he got tied up in his earlier career as a lobbyist. That's what they got him on, not things related to this. He pled guilty to actions before he came to the Trump campaign. So there's a lot that the public, I think, misunderstands about this. I am reading this report now in real time. It is not for the faint of heart. It is not easily digestible or understandable. You really have to know legal parlance and be familiar with the statutes to even process it. So I know they're going to pull out certain things here and try to make them, more inflammatory than they are. Yes, are there embarrassing things here? No doubt. But criminal? Does it show a conspiracy or a coordinated effort with Russia?
No, when they look like they knew that Mueller, right off the bat.
Mueller substantiates that, he and his team.
One week after the first week in May 2016, 1 week later, the first week of May 2016, Papadopoulos, remember him, a tangential figure on Trump's National Security Advisory List, suggested to a representative of a foreign government that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information damaging to Hillary Clinton. Throughout that period of time, for several months thereafter, Papadopoulos worked with this guy, Mifsud, and 2 Russian nationals to arrange a meeting between the campaign and the Russian government. No meeting took place. Key piece of information. If you wanted to coordinate with Russia and they're dangling this red meat in front of you that, oh my gosh, we have emails. No meeting took place. This is the kind of information that with one piece after another added up in the Mueller team's mind. There was no collusion. There was no coordination. This investigation should have been shut down as soon as they understood that. All this other stuff, Trump's emotions when the special counsel was nominated, that's irrelevant.
No, this is
irrelevant. Really, the more I'm looking at this report and reading it.
No, this is really People Magazine stuff. Guess what he said. It's like Us Magazine.
Hans von Spakovsky is a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He's reading this report. His analysis thus far, very important for the Laura Ingraham podcast. Hans, your take thus far, the media are hanging their hat on the disparate legal theories about what obstruction of justice could mean in the legal sense, and when certain actions would rise to obstructive behavior. That looks like what they're all salivating over in this report.
Yeah, and they're not going to get anywhere with that, because the key things to keep in mind here is the bottom line, and the bottom line is that there were no restrictions of any kind ever put on Bob Mueller and his investigation. The firing of James Comey in no way affected Bob Mueller's investigation. Nowhere did the president ever assert executive privilege. In fact, he made his White House counsel available for 30 hours of interviews by the special prosecutor's team. And, William Barr today, the press conference, made clear that executive privilege wasn't asserted by the president with regard to any of the documents or information that Bob Mueller was looking at. Plus, his personal attorney, the president's personal attorney, also made no attempts to withhold any kind of request for any kind of information or documents to be withheld. So where in the world could anybody assert there was any kind of obstruction of justice?
Well, one thing I know they're going to, again, they have to find something to yammer on about in this report. So here's on page 10. This is like the summary of before they get to all the great details. The office learned that some of the individuals we interviewed or whose conduct we investigated, including some associated with the Trump campaign, deleted relevant communications or communicated during the relevant period using applications that feature encryption or that do not provide for long-term retention of data or communications records. In such cases, the office was not able to corroborate witness statements through comparison to contemporaneous communications or fully question witnesses about statements that appeared inconsistent with other known facts. I say to that, tough noogies. That's just the way the world works. I mean, but, that's the kind of stuff the media is like, well, they were deleting communications. They were using encrypted apps.
Well, look, I agree with you. That's tough, but the evidence that they did find, like I said, didn't support any kind of claims that there was either collusion or obstruction of justice. And it's not as if they weren't trying to find this. As the lawyers for the president pointed out, I mean, come on, one of the chief lawyers or prosecutors hired to Bob Mueller's office was the general counsel for the Clinton Foundation. So it's not as if they weren't trying to do everything they could to find evidence that would substantiate this idea that a collusion occurred, and it didn't happen.
We're talking to Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation. Barr did that quick presser earlier this morning, and people were afterward act like he's a combination of Roy Cohn and Stalin and Putin himself. Let's listen.
Yes. Or did the special counsel indicate that he wanted you to make the decision or that it should be left for Congress? And also, how do you respond to criticism you're receiving from congressional Democrats that you're acting more as an attorney for the president rather than as the chief law enforcement officer?
Well, Special Counsel Mueller did not indicate that his purpose was to leave the decision to Congress. I hope that was not his view, since we don't convene grand juries and conduct criminal investigations for that purpose. He did not. I didn't talk to him directly about the fact that we were making the decision, but I am told that his reaction to that was that it was my prerogative as Attorney General to make that decision.
Your reaction to that?
That was one of the dumbest questions I've ever heard from a reporter. The idea that they would leave a decision up to Congress on a prosecutor's declination decision. I mean, that is just That is idiotic. I mean, does that reporter not understand the fact that it's the executive branch that's in charge of prosecutions, not Congress, and that we have basic separation of powers in this country? I could not believe that question was being asked.
Yeah, how about the question about why wasn't Mueller there with you? And he's like, well, wait a second. No, isn't that in the public's interest? He's like, no. Mueller works for the department. Basically, he's a functionary of the department. He works for me. It's this, again, fundamental dishonesty, or they can't understand what this is, what the function of the executive branch really is. Actually, we have the exchange. Let's listen.
There's a lot of public interest in the absence of the special counsel and members of his team. Was he invited to join you up on the podium? Why is he not here? This is his report, obviously, that you're talking about today.
No, it's not. It's a report he did for me as the Attorney General. He is required under the regulation to provide me with a confidential report. I'm here to discuss my response to that report and my decision, entirely discretionary, to make it public, since these reports are not supposed to be made public. That's what I'm here to discuss.
Yeah, so again, they went above and beyond. He went above and beyond in doing the press conference, doing the summary or the synopsis, and releasing the report, which none of it had to be done. But Trump wanted this done, Hans, because he didn't want there to be any question about transparency or what was known or what wasn't known. That's why he didn't exert executive privilege, frankly, which I would have probably made a different decision on that. But
yeah, I don't seem to recall any kind of criticism of Barack Obama when he asserted executive privilege to prevent all the documents about Operation Fast and Furious and the recklessly stupid decisions made by Eric Holder on that case. And I don't seem to we didn't hear the same kind of criticism, did we?
No, absolutely not. Maxine Waters is on MSNBC discussing Bill Barr. Again, the man who had been Attorney General 30 years ago is suddenly turned into this unethical actor. Let's listen.
He is basically a lackey and a sycophant for the President of the United States of America, and that's all it's going to be. This report is going to be overly redacted, and I don't know if we're going to get anything new or important out of that. I just wish that the Mueller team would come forward, and I hope that Mueller will come before the committee and have a chance to tell his side of what he has done.
Well, again, first of all, it's not overly redacted. I mean, we're reading the report. It's only redacted where the information relates to an ongoing investigation, as far as I can tell. I'm only on page 40, but everything I see is harm to ongoing matter, investigative techniques, which is, again, investigative technique information or harm to ongoing matter. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I've been skimming through the report too, and I agree. But look, Maxine Waters doesn't understand the first thing about legal process, how prosecutors work, or anyone else. So anyone that would take anything she takes as being substantive or even worth consideration, I think is making a huge mistake.
Hans, thank you so much for your analysis of this report. We'll continue this on the Laura Ingraham podcast. And I want to tell you about an amazing service, by the way, called Zeal. And after this week, you might need it. They offer professional in-home massages at your door in an hour. After a long day at work or maybe a workout, Zeal's the perfect way to recharge. You don't have to go all the way to a spa, which is completely inconvenient, or sit around with a bunch of strangers when you're at the gym and then you go to some room and you get a massage. No, isn't the comfort of your own home, the convenience of your own home? That's what Zeal brings to you in privacy, too. So you just open the Zeal app and you choose your favorite massage style, maybe a sports massage or a Swedish or a deep tissue, even a sleep massage. And as little as an hour later, a certified massage therapist will show up at your house and bring their own massage table, and it's awesome for you. And Zeal is growing by leaps and bounds, and it's not surprising. It's like Uber for massages, coming right to your house. Download the Zeal app and use the promo code Laura25 for $25 off your first massage. That's Zeal, Z-E-E-L, Zeal, wellness on the way. Let's go to Bob in California. Bob, welcome.
Hey, Laura, how you doing out there?
Good. I'm awesome.
You know what? I'm awesome today, too.
What's on your mind?
Great to hear. Yeah, I'm in a part of California that isn't exactly Nancy Pelosi country. I'm up in the Sierra foothills.
Oh, beautiful.
Completely different California. But the thing that struck me today, and has struck me all along, was the fact that Trump did not exert or exercise executive privilege. He could have done that all along. There's so many things he could have done where he could have said, you know what, he let Barr just run with it. And that, to me, shows confidence that he had courage in his convictions, that he was not guilty. Do you remember at the beginning when they were saying, a guilty man wouldn't do this and a guilty man wouldn't do that? Trump didn't exert executive privilege. Trump turned over all the stuff he needed to turn over. If you were president of the United States, would you not be ticked off if they were basically thwarting your presidency with this investigation? So I understand if he's angry. But let's make one thing clear, too. Mueller, he's not a nice guy. If he wanted to, he could have gone after Trump if there was lying. He didn't have any problems with Manafort or Papadopoulos or anybody else.
Yeah, they didn't have the goods. They didn't have the goods. They didn't have the guts to fight for a subpoena of Trump to interview him. They got written answers to questions, and it seems like they learned early on there was no collusion, no coordination with Russia, and they kept the investigation going, spinning a plate on a stick, trying to figure out, okay, how can we get him on obstruction? And so they floated some of these novel legal theories. Trump was pissed off that he was being investigated, wanted to shut down this investigation. Who doesn't know that? We all know that. He wanted this thing over.
Well, he said it publicly. Here's the rub, and this is what people who don't want to wade through this report, they need to read this. When they hear about obstruction charges, obstruction of justice by the president, this is Mueller from the report. The investigation concerned the president and some of his actions, such as firing the FBI director, involved facially lawful acts within the Article 2 authority, which raises constitutional issues. At the same time, the president's position as head of the executive branch provided him with unique and powerful means of influencing official proceedings. Here's the most important line. Second, unlike cases in which a subject engages in obstruction of justice to cover up a crime, the evidence we, the Mueller team, obtained did not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. Although the obstruction statutes do not require proof of such a crime, the absence of this evidence affects the analysis of the president's intent and requires consideration of other possible motives for his conduct. So what they're basically saying is he wasn't guilty of coordination with Russia. No one on his team was, and therefore his public tweets, his outrage, his asides at rallies do not show intent to shut down or obstruct justice. That's not what Mueller sees here. Now, he leaves it up to the Attorney General to make that determination, but if he had the goods, he would have recommended indicting the president or those around him. They've got 50 people around him he could have indicted. They didn't. They indicted them on side issues, tax problems, wire fraud, mail fraud, lobbying unregistered in foreign countries. They did not indict anybody, no matter what you hear. None of the parties affiliated with Trump or his campaign were prosecuted, indicted, or found guilty of coordinating or conspiracy in any way, collusion with Russia during the campaign. That's a fact.
Does anyone think the media will ever recover from this? Not in my lifetime. Glenn Greenwald's tweets this morning, Raymond's going to read them because they are among the funniest indictments of this media. He's been on a tear because he believes that our geopolitical standing has been affected by this investigation. Our ability to work with Russia in areas of common concern has been affected. And yeah, we know Russia tried to muck around in our elections, and we're dealing with that. But we still deal with people. We deal with China. China steals everything on that you can't nail down, and even more things that you can nail down. They steal everything from us, and we work with them.
Here's Greenwald on the CNN panel this morning that we watched. I've honestly never seen the type of media meltdown that I'm seeing on CNN. They are so emotionally invested in the storyline that they've been pushing for 2+ years, and they know what Mueller did to it and how this will forever reflect on them. CNN has 8 people talking about this, and they all vehemently agree with one another on every other thing. This has been a major part of the problem from the start. And then he goes on, they're not even pretending. They don't even have a token dissenter who gets to speak for 30 seconds every 10 minutes. It's the most emotional thing I've ever seen from TV news people. I'm almost feeling sorry for this panel. They're really hurt and not even hiding it. Just live up to what you've done. He goes on and on. He said CNN should have a countdown clock for when their attacks on Robert Mueller starts. It's not long now.
Let's listen to what they hoped for over the last 2 years and were so disappointed not to have today.
Does the public understand just how much trouble the president is in?
To believe that the president isn't compromised requires such a leap of faith.
I think we have all the proof we need of a scandal that's arguably worse than Watergate.
Do we know if there is still this belief and aspect that the president is working for the Russians? I can't answer that.
There is tons of proof of potential collusion.
We have dramatic evidence of collusion.
How is it not collusion?
A political hurricane is out there at sea for him. We'll call it Hurricane Vladimir, if you will.
Donald Trump knows the noose is tightening.
The noose is tightening.
The noose is tightening.
Well, I think they're all going to end up together in prison, and maybe that's a good thing.
Oh, my God.
You know what? As you listen to
disgusting.
As you listen to
it's
that.
Disgusting.
But I feel sad. I actually share Greenwald's sadness. I'm going to tell you why. We, the media, are here to protect the interests of the American people, give them information they don't have access to, and to hold the powerful accountable. What's happened here is you have a media that has corrupted its own intent, corrupted its own mission by jumping on a bandwagon with nothing, no evidence at all, just beating the drum and grabbing the torches and the pitchforks and storming the hill. Now what do? How do you rebuild this? And I'll tell you, I don't like the idea, Laura, of a partisan and ideological media where no one can trust anybody.
No.
That's horrible for a republic constituted the way America is. And we have to do soul searching as a country and as a media about where do we go from here? But this episode, it's eroded public trust in the media. And Trump, with that fake news moniker, has really ripped the skin off the media collusion, and I fear dismantled trust in media, maybe for forever. Certainly
all the people who make appearances: Rona Graff, the secretary for Trump, of course, Corey Lewandowski, Michael Cohen's all over this. There's a section, Donald Trump. There's a section in the report on page 78 where they talk about candidate Trump's opportunities to travel to Russia. So we all have opportunities to travel to Russia. But, Michael Cohen wanted him to go there were 2 different times where Cohen wanted him to go to Russia to have, to meet as part of these, real estate. It was actually the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. But Trump received and turned down an invitation to go to it. In late December 2015, Mira Duma, a contact of Ivanka Trump's from the fashion industry, first passed along invitations for Ivanka Trump and candidate Trump from Sergei Porotko, a deputy prime minister of the Russian Federation. On January 14, 2016, Rona Graff sent an email to Duma stating that Trump was honored to be asked to participate in the highly prestigious forum event, but he would have to decline because he has a grueling and full travel schedule. So are they saying that because Rona Graff, in a perfunctory communication with this Russian individual, said that it was a highly prestigious forum event, people from all over the world went to this event. The St. Petersburg Economic Forum is like the Chicago Economic Forum. It's a big deal. So people from Middle East, South America, Africa, all go to this thing. But you see how they are throwing this into the report as, well, look, there were opportunities. This is one of the funniest things in the report so far. Opportunities. It does not appear that Graff prepared that note immediately. According to written answers from President Trump, Graff received an email from the deputy prime minister on March 17, 2016, again inviting Trump to participate. in the 2016 forum in St. Petersburg. 2 weeks later, on March 31st, Graf prepared for Trump's signature a 2-paragraph letter declining the invitation. The letter stated that Trump's schedule has become extremely demanding because of the presidential campaign, that he already had several commitments. Graf forwarded the letter to another executive assistant at the Trump Organization with instructions to print the document on letterhead for Trump to sign. Dun, dun, dun. I mean, come on. No communications or other evidence obtained by the office indicate that the Trump campaign learned that Forsman was reaching out to invite the candidate, this another individual, to another event in Russia later that year. My friends, look, I'm skimming this for you, but I can tell you this. This is, you know, when you had to write a paper and it had to be a 10-page paper, and so you either did it with like triple spacing, you try to do that, or you just threw in a lot of extraneous information so it would reach that 10-page limit. You get the sense here that they were throwing everything in the kitchen sink into look at the all day. Trump had opportunities to travel to Russia. Emails were written and printed out, and he had to sign them, letters to Russian officials. Steve in Texas. Real quick. Steve.
Well, I think for sure our president has been vindicated from the collusion and obstruction. And you're right, the mainstream media and the left are they're never going to give up on tearing this guy down. And it's like they're crying today. They'll be crying the rest of the year. They'll be crying into the election year, and they'll be crying after that. And it's sad, and it's he's doing this. This man is doing everything in his power to make our country the strongest economy in the world, and it's sad to see that people.
It's unpatriotic. It's unpatriotic.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it for you. It's deeply unpatriotic for them to have done what they've done and continue in the face of this report to continue to say what they're saying. Do they have no shame? Honestly, no shame. All these people at MSNBC and CNN, people who are members of the bar. I mean, they're officers of the court, and they're lying on national television about all of this. By the way, an interesting tweet from Michael Tracy. Mueller debunks one of the foundational myths of the Trump-Russia probe, which is that the effort to change the GOP platform in 2016 was somehow part of a grand collusion plot. That's totally debunked as well, just as one of the many things. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham podcast. Delighted you're with us. Remember, I want to thank all of our sponsors who supported this show: Genucel, Delta Animal Rescue, Legacy Box, and Zeal. All of you make this possible for free. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful Easter, and we just look forward to being back here. I'm going to have an Easter break. We're going to have some great best ofs in the hopper. You'll be able to listen to parts of podcasts you missed before. So remember, Laura.
RCA Victor Television. One more day to Labor Day weekend, the traditional occasion for tasty outdoor barbecues or picnics.
you are between me and...
Times Square, 42nd Street. Transfer is available. 1